Good morning, 7th graders. Today is March the 30th, and we are doing pages 272 to 273. And we're going to talk a little bit about the conquest of India. And we talked a little bit about it last week, but just as a review of what was going on. Now remember, during this time, the French tried to gain control of India as well. British and French have had a long history of not getting along with one another, and you know, they went through the 100 Years' War. They just fought for everything. So you have the end of the French influence. They just gave up. They're not going to give any influence on in India. British had more control, and British trade with India grew over the next 100 years. It started doing well, and then it started beginning to take control over the East India Company because that company was going out of business. It wasn't doing well, so it was getting more influence and more power over India through that way. The British government became more involved, and a man by the name of Lord Cornwallis was in charge of stopping these rebellions in India. Now, do you remember who Lord Cornwallis was, or who he is, or what importance he did in American history? Well, if you remember, he was the same general that surrendered to George Washington at the Battle of Saratoga that ended the War of Independence, or the Revolutionary War. Same Cornwallis here. So that's kind of an interesting story in itself. So later on, the British government continued to give more power to East India Company, and then they started the Charter Act. The Charter Act gave the British Crown control over that company completely. All right, so the one thing that led to this control was sepoys. Now remember, the sepoys were hired Indian soldiers that they hired to fight. Now remember, they had a mutiny. And you remember why they had this mutiny? Well, the mutiny began because of a rumor that the cartridges they used, remember I said they had to use these cartridges, and when they were spread, or they were lubricated with, or greased, whatever you want to call it, with pork or beef fat to make it easier to open. Okay, so while they had their muskets that they used, they had to rip open these cartridges with their mouth. Well, you have people, soldiers from India, and then you have the Muslim soldiers. Remember, we talked about the Hindu soldiers were offended. Now, these were rumors. We don't know if they were true, but they heard this. So the Hindu soldiers were offended because the cow was sacred to them. They worshiped the cow, so they weren't going to eat any beef. And the Muslim soldiers were offended because they considered pork unclean, just like the Jews. They don't eat pork, right? So when British soldiers told the sepoys to load the new rifles, they refused. They're like, we're not doing it for sake of religion or whatever. So that caused a big problem. British forces arrested and they imprisoned the sepoys when they refused to obey this command. And because of this, a mutiny arose. A lot of people started fighting one another. A mutiny is when they just go against the government or whatever, their leaders. And a lot of people died, both sides. Many massacred during this time, and a lot of innocent people lost their lives. So it took about a year for Britain to suppress this mutiny, and Queen Victoria responded by proclaiming India under control of the British Crown, and that the Indian people had a voice in their own government. So even though they were controlled by the British people, they still had some say in their government. If you go to India a lot, especially the older people, a lot of them have a British accent because it was so influenced by England for so long. Okay, so so that is just a thing. So it took a while for them to finally leave India and to let them have their own. Okay. Another thing we talked about is the actually no, we're not gonna go there. The one thing. Oh yeah, we are. I just wanted to. If you go on to the next page, just a little bit, patterns for British trade with India and China. British merchants, with the support of the British government, developed extensive trade between India and China. And one of the things that they traded, well, and Britain became very wealthy because of this, because, you know, so they had control of India. And one of the things that they traded was they produced opium from poppy plants in India, and they exported to China. It was addicting. It was kind of like a drug, and the Chinese people demanded it because they got addicted to this opium. In addition to the terrible damage inflicted to the Chinese due to the opium addiction, this reversal became a great financial drain on China. So you can just read that section by your part. Go ahead and actually, we'll do the section review together. Why did the English originally travel to India? Let's see here. Clinton, if you're reading this, why did the English originally travel to India? Well, the answer is on page 290. It was the fur trade. What other European state sought to compete with Britain for control of India? Lily. If you said France, you are correct. Let's see. What act? Let's see my act. What act in 1814 gave the British Crown control over all of the East India Company's holding? Jonathan. It's on page 292. And hopefully you said Charter Act. By the way, Jonathan, I'm not sure if you're watching these videos because I haven't heard anything from you. What? Oh, hey! Stop it! I'm videoing! My dogs have been quarantined, and so when they see other people... Hey! Stop it! Okay, sorry about that. Stop it! They're as obedient as you guys. All right, so I'll just do it a little bit louder. What rumor led to the Sepoy Mutiny? Alyssa. Stop it. The rifle cartridges that had been greased with pork or beef fat. And then what drug did British merchants sell to the Chinese in order to gain favorable balance of trade? Let's see. Willem, what do you have? The answer's on page 293. It's opium. Like I said, my dogs are quarantined. They haven't seen a lot of people, so they just saw somebody walking outside, and sorry about that. In light of Exodus 20:13 and 17, it says evaluate the British motives for selling addictive opium to the Chinese. Well, the British sold a destructive drug that led to addiction and eventually death. Willingly, they knew this was going to happen. They were willing to go to war and kill Chinese soldiers to protect their market. They coveted the wealth of the Chinese. Not very nice people. So tomorrow we will talk about the dominance of Asia, and hopefully you guys are doing well. You're wearing your crazy hair. Notice I didn't, because everything that's on the internet forever, and one of these days someone's going to find this video and there's absolutely no way I'm gonna look crazy. But tomorrow I will wear my sports shirt. Okay, I love you guys. I miss you. I hope you're doing well. I hope you're making good choices. And I will see you soon, hopefully. Bye.